The wind howled through the dense forest, carrying with it a biting cold that clung to everything in its path. Snowflakes danced wildly in the air, swirling like ghosts between the towering pines. The landscape was a vast, frozen wilderness, untamed, merciless, and eerily silent. Ranger Emily Carter pulled her scarf tighter around her face, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. She had patrolled these lands for over 15 years, knew every path, every ridge, every clearing. But today felt different. Something was wrong. The crunch of her boots against the thick snow was the only sound accompanying her as she moved carefully along the trail. The storm was intensifying, reducing visibility to mere feet ahead of her. Even with her years of experience, she knew the dangers of being caught too deep in the forest during a blizzard. Then, she heard it. A faint, desperate sound carried by the wind. Emily stopped in her tracks, her pulse quickening. She turned her head, scanning the whitened landscape. The snowfall blurred everything into shifting shadows, making it hard to distinguish movement. But the sound came again, a weak, trembling whinny. Her eyes locked onto a small figure in the distance. A foal. Alone. The sight sent a jolt through Emily's chest. A young Mustang, barely able to walk, was struggling through the deep snow. His tiny legs trembled with every step, his damp coat clinging to his fragile frame. He was so small, so unprotected against the brutal cold. Emily's breath hitched. Where was his mother? Where was his herd? Wild Mustangs never left their young behind, not unless... A sinking feeling settled in her stomach. She took a slow step forward, her voice gentle but firm against the roar of the wind. "Hey there, little guy." The foal stopped, his ears flicking toward her. His dark, wide eyes locked onto hers, filled with something raw, something pleading. He wasn't just wandering, he wasn't just lost. He was looking for someone. Emily's heart pounded. The foal let out another whimper, lifting his tiny head toward her. Then he turned and stumbled forward. But he didn't flee. He took a few shaky steps, then stopped and looked back at her. Emily's breath caught. He was waiting, begging her to follow. A shiver ran down her spine, and it wasn't from the cold. Something was out there, something he needed her to see. She took a deep breath, adjusting the strap of her rifle on her shoulder. "All right, little guy," she murmured. "Show me what you need me to see." The foal let out a weak breath, then started moving again. Emily followed. The snowfall thickened, making the trek more difficult. The foal's tiny hooves sank deep into the drifts, but he refused to stop. He was determined. Emily's mind raced through the possibilities. Had his herd abandoned him? Unlikely. Even in the harshest conditions, Mustangs stayed together. Had his mother... Emily didn't let herself finish the thought. The foal suddenly stumbled. Emily's heart lurched. She stepped forward instinctively, but he caught himself, shaking off the snow before pressing on. He was exhausted, freezing, but he wasn't giving up. Emily swallowed hard. Whatever was waiting for them out there, it wasn't good. The forest grew darker as they moved deeper into the wilderness. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with snow. The wind shrieked through the pines, sending icy fingers crawling down Emily's spine. Then, the foal stopped. His ears perked forward, his tiny body trembling. Emily squinted through the blizzard. At first, she saw nothing but white. Then, her eyes adjusted. A mound in the snow. Number? Not a mound, a body. Emily's stomach twisted violently. She rushed forward, her knees hitting the snow as she reached out with shaking hands. Beneath the thick frost, she saw the shape of a larger Mustang, the foal's mother. Emily's breath came in sharp gasps as she brushed snow away, revealing a coat covered in frost, muscles locked with cold. But then she felt it, a faint, struggling heartbeat beneath her palm. Emily's throat tightened. The mare was alive, but just barely. The foal let out a heartbreaking whimper, nuzzling his mother's face, pressing his tiny body against hers as if trying to give her his own warmth. Emily blinked against the freezing wind, her vision blurring. This little foal hadn't been looking for food. He had been looking for help. He had fought through the storm, pushed his tiny body to its limits because he refused to leave her behind. Emily's hands trembled. Her only thought now was, I can't let them die. She pressed the radio on her shoulder, her voice steadied despite the lump in her throat. HQ, this is Ranger Carter. I need an emergency rescue at my location. Injured Mustang. Severe hypothermia. Static crackled before a response. Copy that, Carter. ETA 20 minutes. Can you keep her stable? Emily turned to the foal, whose dark eyes were still locked onto hers. He trusted her. She wouldn't let them down. Setting her jaw, she yanked off her thick insulated ranger coat and draped it over the mare's frozen body. It wasn't enough, but it was something. The foal, sensing her urgency, pressed against his mother's neck, sharing what little warmth he had. Emily's chest ached. He had never left her, never given up, and neither would she. Reaching into her pack, she pulled out an emergency thermal blanket, wrapping it over the mare's back to seal in whatever heat was left. Then she grabbed a small flask of warm water from her bag, carefully tilting it toward the mare's lips. Come on, girl, she whispered. Stay with us. For a long, excruciating moment, nothing happened. Emily felt her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Had she found them too late? Then, a flicker of movement. The mare's nostrils flared. Emily sucked in a sharp gasp. That's it, she whispered. Come on, girl. The foal let out a desperate whinny, nudging his mother's cheek. And then the mare let out the faintest sound, a weak, exhausted whinny in response. Emily laughed through her tears, pressing the radio again. She's fighting. And so was the foal. Now it was only a matter of time. Would the rescue team arrive before the cold took her completely? Emily held her breath and waited. The wind cut through the trees like a living thing, wailing as it whipped snowflakes into blinding spirals. Emily pressed her body closer to the injured mare, trying to shield her from the biting cold. The foal stood nearby, his frail frame trembling violently. His dark eyes darted between Emily and his mother, pleading for something, anything, that would make her wake up. Emily swallowed hard. She had seen animals give up before. She had watched the life fade from their eyes, their bodies succumb to the merciless grip of winter. But this mare, this foal, they weren't ready to give up. Neither was she. Her fingers fumbled inside her ranger's pack, searching for anything that could help. A heating pack, a ration, anything to keep them going until the rescue team arrived. The radio at her shoulder crackled. Carter, do you copy? She pressed the button, her breath shaking. Go ahead. We're still 20 minutes out, storm's slowing us down. Emily clenched her jaw. 20 minutes. It might as well have been a lifetime. She turned back to the mare, whose shallow breaths barely stirred the cold air. Her eyelids fluttered, her body motionless beneath the layers of emergency blankets. The thermal material trapped some heat, but it wasn't enough. She was slipping away. The foal let out a soft, broken whimper. Emily's chest tightened. He had followed her for miles, pushed through the storm, all for this moment, to bring help, to save his mother. And he was watching as she faded before his eyes. Emily refused to let that happen. Reaching into her pack, she grabbed a flask of warm water. Carefully, she tilted it near the mare's lips, willing her to take even the smallest sip. "Come on, girl," she murmured. "Stay with me." No movement. Emily pressed the edge of the flask against her muzzle, a few drops slipping past her lips. Still, nothing. The foal let out a sharp, distressed whinny. He nuzzled her, pressing his small body against hers, sharing every bit of warmth he had left. Emily felt her throat tighten. She reached for the mare's foreleg and rubbed gently, trying to stimulate her circulation. "Don't do this," she whispered. "Your baby needs you." Then, a flicker of movement. Emily sucked in a sharp breath. "That's it," she whispered. She drizzled another small sip of water near the mare's lips. This time, her tongue barely flicked forward. The smallest motion, but enough. A spark, a chance. The foal whimpered, pressing against her even harder. His desperate warmth, his refusal to leave her. It was keeping her anchored to this world. Emily wiped at her face, feeling the sting of cold tears against her skin. She wasn't just watching a rescue. She was witnessing a battle between life and death. And this little foal, so young, so small, was refusing to let go. Emily pressed the radio again, her voice firm. "She's fighting." Static crackled before the reply. "Carter, status update. Can she hold on?" Emily turned her gaze back to the mare. Her breaths were slow, but steady. "She's trying." Her fingers clenched into fists. "But she needs time." 15 minutes. That was all they had to hold on. Emily adjusted the emergency blankets again, tucking them tighter around the mare's frail body. Her muscles were locked from the cold, but she wasn't as still as before. She was trying. The foal let out another tiny sound, nudging her gently, his muzzle soft against her cheek. Barely, just a twitch of her ear, but enough for Emily to believe. A lump formed in her throat as she gently stroked the mare's forehead. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" she whispered. A gust of wind rattled through the trees, sending another wave of snow swirling around them. Emily braced herself, tightening her grip on the mare's body, shielding her as much as she could. Every second felt like an eternity. Every breath she took, she counted hers too. The foal never moved from her side. Emily glanced down at him, something deep and unspoken passing between them. He trusted her, and she wasn't going to fail him. 10 minutes left. Emily reached into her pack again, fingers shaking from the cold. Food. It wasn't much, but she had an energy bar tucked away. She broke off a small piece, pressing it gently near the mare's mouth. At first, nothing. Then a weak flicker of movement. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. "She's still fighting," she whispered. The foal let out a high-pitched whinny, his breath forming little clouds in the freezing air. Emily ran a hand over the mare's forehead. "You hear that? Your baby needs you." The mare's ear twitched slightly. Her breath, it was steadier now. Emily felt the weight pressing against her chest begin to lift. She had a chance. A real chance. The rumble of engines broke through the wind. Emily's head snapped up, her pulse racing. They were here. She turned to the foal, her breath shaking. "You did it, little guy," she whispered. He had found her, and now they were going to make it. The deep rumble of approaching engines sliced through the howling wind, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had enveloped the frozen clearing. Emily's chest tightened as she spotted the headlights flickering through the snowfall. They had made it. The foal lifted his head at the sound, his small ears twitching. His frail frame still trembled from exhaustion and cold, but his dark eyes never left his mother. He didn't understand what was happening, not fully, but he knew this was important. Emily stood quickly, waving both arms above her head. "Over here!" she shouted, her voice barely carrying over the storm. The first snow-covered truck skidded to a stop, followed closely by a second vehicle towing a small livestock trailer. Two men in thick ranger jackets leaped out, moving fast. The first, Liam, rushed toward her, his breath forming clouds in the icy air. His eyes darted to the collapsed mare, then back to Emily. "Jesus, Carter," he muttered. "You weren't kidding." "She's hypothermic," Emily said quickly, kneeling again to adjust the emergency blanket over the mare. "She's been down for hours. I've stabilized her as much as I can, but she needs to get out of this cold, now." Liam crouched beside her, scanning the mare's condition. He could see the fight still left in her, but only barely. His gaze flickered to the foal, who was glued to his mother's side, his tiny body pressing against hers. "Is that her baby?" Liam asked. Emily nodded. "He followed me for miles to bring me here." Liam let out a low whistle, shaking his head. This little guy must really love his mama. The foal let out a small, desperate whinny. Emily swallowed hard, her throat tightening. Love wasn't strong enough a word. Liam stood quickly, turning toward the other rangers. "All right, let's move fast. She won't last much longer out here." The team sprang into action. A heavy-duty stretcher was unrolled beside the mare. Two rangers positioned themselves at her front and rear, securing straps carefully around her body. Every movement had to be slow, controlled, to avoid shocking her fragile system. Emily stayed close, her hand never leaving the mare's forehead. "Easy, girl," she whispered. "We're getting you out of here." The foal let out a panicked sound the moment the rangers began lifting his mother. His hooves kicked up snow as he tried to push forward, his tiny frame desperate to stop them. Emily immediately stepped in front of him, her hands gently pressing against his chest. "Shh," she whispered, her voice soothing. "It's okay, we're helping her." The foal's breath came in short, nervous bursts. His little muscles tensed, like he wanted to fight, like he thought they were taking her away. Emily stayed completely still. Then, slowly, he stopped. His wild, frantic eyes locked onto hers. Emily kept her voice soft. "She's safe now." She lifted a hand, hesitating for just a moment before brushing her fingers over his forehead. To her surprise, he didn't flinch. Instead, he let out a small, quivering breath. As if, for the first time since this nightmare began, he finally believed her. Liam gestured toward the trailer. "We've got heat packs inside. Let's get her in before her temperature drops any lower." Emily took a step forward, and the foal followed. Liam blinked in surprise. "Well, looks like you've got a shadow now." Emily let out a breathless laugh, her chest tightening. "He's not leaving her," she said softly. "Not now." Together, they carefully guided both mother and foal toward the trailer. Emily watched as the foal pressed against his mother's side the moment she was settled inside, his small frame curled up beside hers, as if making sure she was really there. For the first time that night, he relaxed. For the first time he felt safe. Emily exhaled, rubbing her cold hands together as the warmth of the trailer finally wrapped around them. The mother Mustang's chest rose and fell in shallow but steady breaths. Her body was still weak, but she was alive. The foal refused to leave her side. Emily watched the way he clung to her, exhaustion finally catching up to him. His tiny muscles trembled, not from cold, but from sheer relief. Liam secured the trailer doors and climbed in beside Emily, kneeling to check on the mare. "She's got a long road ahead," he muttered, "but her breathing is steady. That's a damn good sign." Emily nodded, though her chest still felt tight. She had survived the storm, but hypothermia was unforgiving. If her body temperature didn't rise soon, she might not make it through the night. Emily reached into the supply kit and pulled out another thick emergency blanket. She draped it gently over the mare, tucking it around her legs, trying to trap as much heat as possible. The foal lifted his head slightly, watching her every move. His dark, glassy eyes were filled with something unspoken. Emily reached out again, her fingers barely brushing against his muzzle. He didn't move away. Instead, he pressed his face into her palm. Emily swallowed hard, forcing back the sudden wave of emotion in her chest. "You did good, little guy," she whispered. "You got her here. You saved her." Liam watched the exchange, shaking his head. "Wild Mustangs don't act like that." Emily kept her eyes on the foal. "I don't think he's just any wild Mustang." The mare stirred slightly under the blanket, her ears twitching for the first time since they found her. The foal's head snapped toward her. Emily held her breath. Slowly, the mare opened her eyes, weak, groggy, but alive. The foal let out a desperate, high-pitched whinny, pressing his tiny nose against her cheek. The mare blinked slowly, and then she responded. A soft, exhausted huff of air. Emily let out a shaky laugh, blinking against the cold wind. Liam grinned. "That's a damn good sign." The foal nudged his mother again, curling up beside her. His breathing finally slowed. For the first time since Emily had met him, his body was at peace. The exhaustion, the panic, the desperate search through the snow. It was all over. Liam tapped his radio. "ETA 15 minutes, he said. "Think she'll be able to stand when we get there?" Emily looked at the mare. Her eyes were clearer now. She was still weak, but there was a new energy in her breath. She had been on the edge of death, but now she was coming back. Emily nodded. "Yeah," she whispered, "she'll stand." And when she did, it would be the beginning of a whole new life. The truck rumbled through the icy forest, its heavy tires crunching over snow-covered trails. Inside the trailer, the rhythmic sway of the vehicle barely seemed to disturb the small, fragile family. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor beside the mare and her foal, her gloved hands resting gently against the emergency blanket that wrapped around the mare's body. The foal refused to leave her side. His small frame was pressed tightly against hers, his breath slow, steady, for the first time in hours, maybe even days. Emily exhaled, letting herself relax just a little. For the first time, she truly believed they were going to make it. Liam, sitting across from her, gave her a sideways glance. "You look like hell, Carter." Emily let out a quiet, breathless laugh. "Thanks, Liam. You sure know how to charm a lady." Liam smirked, but didn't push. He knew what that look in her eyes meant. She was exhausted. She had spent hours in the snow, risking hypothermia herself to keep the mare alive. Every second had been a gamble, every moment teetering on the edge of too late. But now, the mare was breathing. She had opened her eyes. She had acknowledged her foal, and now she was here. The foal, still curled up beside his mother, flicked his ears slightly at the sound of their voices but didn't move. His dark eyes were barely open, his body finally allowing itself to rest. Emily swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "He followed me through the storm," she murmured, more to herself than to Liam. Liam leaned forward slightly. "Yeah?" Emily nodded, her gaze locked onto the foal. "He didn't run, didn't wander. He knew where I was, and he didn't stop until I followed him." Liam studied her expression for a moment, then exhaled. "That's rare," he admitted. Emily looked up. Liam shrugged. "Mustangs are born wild. Even the young ones are taught not to trust humans. But this one? He found you. He chose to trust you." Emily glanced back at the foal. He wasn't just any wild Mustang. He was something else. Something stronger. Something that refused to give up. The truck hit a small bump, causing the mare to stir beneath the blankets. Emily immediately turned her focus to her, watching closely. The mare blinked. Her breath, though still slow, was stronger now. Her nostrils flared slightly as she took in the unfamiliar scents around her. Emily reached out instinctively, placing a hand gently on the mare's forehead. "You're okay," she whispered. "You made it." The mare didn't flinch, didn't pull away. She simply breathed. Liam shifted beside her. "How long do you think she was out there?" Emily shook her head. "No way to know for sure." She glanced down at the foal again. "But long enough for him to realize no one was coming." Liam exhaled sharply. The thought was sobering. This little foal, barely strong enough to stand, had made a choice most adult animals wouldn't. He hadn't left his mother. Hadn't abandoned her when survival instincts screamed for him to run. Instead, he found help. Emily rubbed a hand over her face, pushing back the exhaustion threatening to overtake her. Liam crossed his arms. "You know, we should probably start thinking about what's next." Emily sighed. "Yeah, we can't keep them forever." She knew that. Of course she knew that, but something in her chest ached at the thought. The foal had fought so hard to save his mother, to bring her back from the brink. And now, when she was finally starting to recover, they were supposed to release them? Back into the same wilderness that had nearly taken them both. Liam must have seen the flicker of hesitation in her expression, because he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Emily nodded. That, at least, was something. She glanced at the foal again, his breathing slow and even, his small chest rising and falling against his mother's side. She reached out, brushing her fingers over his forehead one more time. And for the second time that night, he leaned into her touch. Not out of desperation, not out of fear, but because he trusted her. And Emily knew, deep in her gut, that no matter what happened next, she would never forget him. The truck slowed, the radio crackling to life. ETA 5 minutes. Liam sighed, stretching his arms. Finally. Emily straightened her back, taking a deep breath. 5 minutes, and then a new beginning. The truck rolled to a slow stop just outside the ranger station. The snowstorm had begun to ease, the heavy flakes thinning as the first hints of morning light stretched across the horizon. The sky was still a deep, frozen blue, but the promise of dawn glowed at the edges. Emily inhaled deeply, feeling the icy air fill her lungs. This was it, the moment they had fought for. She turned toward the mare, whose breathing, though still shallow, was stronger now. Her body was no longer locked in that terrifying stillness. She stirred beneath the thick blankets, shifting her legs just slightly, testing them. Beside her, the foal immediately lifted his head. His ears flicked forward, his dark eyes locked onto his mother. Emily held her breath. Slowly, painfully, the mare blinked. And this time, when her eyes opened, they stayed open. The foal let out an excited, high-pitched whinny, scrambling to his feet. His tiny legs wobbled as he nudged her, urging her to respond. Emily swallowed against a lump in her throat. The mare inhaled deeply. She shifted again. Her muscles, stiff from hours of cold and exhaustion, fought against her. But then she pushed herself up. Emily exhaled sharply, hardly believing what she was seeing. The foal whinnied again, circling her in small, eager steps. His entire body radiated relief. The mare, though still weak, was standing. Liam let out a low whistle from behind Emily. Damn. She's got more fight in her than I thought. Emily couldn't help the soft laugh that escaped her lips. She had a reason to fight, she murmured. She wasn't just fighting for herself. The mare turned her head slowly, her gaze landing on the foal. And then she leaned down and nuzzled him. Emily felt something break inside her. A wave of emotion crashed through her, more powerful than she had expected. It was over, the storm, the fear, the desperate fight against time. They had made it. The foal let out another joyful sound, pressing himself against his mother's side. And this time, instead of desperation, there was peace. Emily wiped at her face, shaking her head. God, Liam, I think I'm losing it. Liam smirked. You're crying, Carter. Emily sniffed. Shut up, Liam. But he didn't tease her further, because he understood. They had just witnessed something rare, something powerful, the unshakable bond between a mother and her child, a love so strong that it had defied the storm, defied death itself. Emily exhaled, stepping back as the team moved in, preparing the mare for further observation. Liam crossed his arms. So, what happens next? Emily bit her lip, watching the foal press himself against his mother. They recover, she said. They rest. And then, one day, they return to the wild. Liam nodded. Think he'll remember you? Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she crouched down one last time, reaching out gently. The foal turned toward her, watching her carefully, and then he took a slow step forward. For the third time that night, he leaned into her touch. Emily felt her throat tighten. He would remember. She didn't know how long. Didn't know if he would search for her one day when he was older, stronger, running wild through the open fields. But right now, in this moment, he knew. She had saved him, and he had saved her too. She ran her hand softly down his muzzle, offering the only words she had left. Stay wild, little guy. The foal blinked slowly. Then he turned back to his mother. Emily stood, stepping away. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Final CTA. This story is a powerful reminder that love, loyalty, and courage aren't just human traits. They exist in the wild, too. A tiny Mustang foal, lost and desperate, refused to give up. Because of his love, his mother survived. He braved the storm, fought against the impossible, and found help, changing both of their lives forever. If this story touched your heart, help us share it with the world. Like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Emily's place? Because sometimes, even the smallest creatures teach us the biggest lessons. Thank you for watching.